Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Now, as you might recall from our review of Thor: The Dark World, I expressed some concern about the future of Marvel films, largely overtone, because previously I think Marvel has done a good job of delivering light, fun fare, which is in contrast to what DC is doing, darker and more serious, and that's worked for them so far. However, it's a fine line between light and fun and outright cartoony, and I felt that with Thor: The Dark World, the Marvel movies took their first steps across that line. Now, of course, some people, a large group of people, feel that all is fine, better than fine. Thor: The Dark World, as many people have expressed their second favorite movie after The Avengers. However, I did see a lot of people in the comments expressing a similar opinion to my own, that Thor: The Dark World had too many comedic moments, and not just too many, but they were inappropriate moments, and they kind of cheapened the film and took away from moments that could have been more dramatic, and also took up screen time that could have been used for further character development, particularly when it comes to the villain and such. So while I think Thor is debatable, however, yesterday the casting notices for Ant-Man leaked, and this is where I think even more concern starts to come into play. We'll get into them in a second, but let's first set up Ant-Man. Now, Ant-Man already comes to the plate with problems, I feel, with trying to cross over to mainstream audiences. I feel it has a very Honey, I Shrunk the Kids vibe to it, obviously, and also it has Edgar Wright at the helm. I'm an Edgar Wright fan, like many of you, but his fan base is a strong but small contingent. And I think it's just a basic fact that his style just hasn't appealed to mainstream moviegoers. Perhaps it will with Marvel, but it just hasn't worked out. Now, I think he can do good action. I thought that the action sequences in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World were the best part of the film, and I was very impressed. And I think there has been some question going into Ant-Man if this is going to be an action movie with some comedy in it, or is it going to be an outright Edgar Wright comedic film with more action in it. Kind of like Scott Pilgrim was. And Scott Pilgrim, of course, was a huge box office disappointment, one of the low points for comic book films, because not only did it not do well at the box office, but it was such a huge disappointment. There had been such buzz going into it. So that made the lack of its box office performance even more dramatic. So the casting notices came out, and I'll share them with you and why I'm concerned, and let's see how you guys feel about it, okay? So I have them up here. One is that some people are saying that this might be Scott Lang will be the Ant-Man because they're looking for a little girl, which people say could be Cassie Lang. And they want a girl, though. This is a very little girl, though. A young girl, ages 6 to 9, intelligent and appealing. Well, I should hope so. Why would you cast someone who wasn't intelligent and appealing? Anyway, 6 to 9 is very young and adds a definitive child family element to the film. Now, sometimes it works. I liked having the child actors in Jurassic Park. I thought it was fun. It was about a movie about a theme park. And I think sometimes when you put kid actors in a movie, it can be fun for kids watching them to kind of imagine themselves in the same scenario. But Jurassic Park treated their child actors with a lot of respect and sophistication. They were full members of the cast, and they had some great action sequences, and they were very capable. They contributed to the story. They weren't just kids in danger. You have damsels in distress, and I guess you can have babes in distress. I guess babes in distress could apply to either one, but here we're using it for kids. So putting a young child in an Ant-Man film is very, very tricky and makes me a little nervous, and as I said, could really add to that cartoon feeling. The other thing they're looking for, so they have 5 people, other characters listed, all male, by the way. They have an Asian male in his 30s, a Caucasian male 30s, over 6 feet tall, Italian-American male 50s. All these people are supposed to be scary and tough, so I guess that's maybe giving us some idea maybe who the villains might be. A Russian male, 30 to 40s, wiry and smart, so I guess that's going to be some kind of tech person, if I know my Hollywood stereotypes. And also a male, 20s or 30s, under 5'8". But the interesting thing that's at the end of every single one of these listings is that they must be comedic. Comedic ability, comedic, deadpan humor, smart and funny. So the fact that is a primary goal for them in casting actors, that they be funny instead of, good, dramatic, right for the role. I mean, I think if you have a good script, anyone can deliver a funny line. And Edgar Wright is a very talented director. I think he could find the humor in any situation. So is this going to just be one giant laugh fest? That's something that I'm concerned about. I wonder what a tiny person laughing sounds like. It could be so funny. But I don't know. I think that's very, very scary to me that Marvel is now not even just adding humor to their films, but it is a primary goal in casting them and how they're being shaped. I will also tell you that if an actor lists themselves and feels they're funny, that's very also scary because a lot of people who who wear their funniness on their sleeve tend to overdo it and play things very strongly for laughs instead of organically, and there's a fakeness to it. I think that's another big problem that you could have. Comedic actors aren't always the best actors in terms of depth. I mean, look at Tom Hiddleston. That guy's hilarious as Loki, and I think that he would never really, I don't think he would categorize himself. Maybe now he would, but I think in the beginning he wasn't like, yeah, I'm a funny guy. You gotta move over, Eddie Murphy. I don't think that's how he was feeling. Now, the other thing I'm concerned about with Marvel movies is running out of actors. They are just so prolific and have such crowded casts, no less, that they really, I think they should go the unknown route, the way Star Wars is going. I mean, you might have seen this casting calls for Star Wars. They had open casting calls in the UK, and now also online you can submit audition tapes for young female and male. They're like late teens, early 20s, the characters, and they're really looking for a discovery. Now, that might just be a publicity stunt. I mean, you might recall very back in the day with Gone with the Wind, they held a huge casting call nationwide, which particularly back in the 1930s was hard to do. But at the end of the day, they ended up casting Vivien Leigh anyway, who was already a movie star. So it was just, I think, really to get attention for the film. But anyway, there are only so many actors under the sun, and Marvel is going to television. Now, people were saying it was between Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Paul Rudd for Ant-Man, whoever Ant-Man might be under the mask. And I felt Paul Rudd was who I would support because I thought it would be interesting to see him in an action movie. He is funny, but I think he can also do drama. And, I think that, now that I'm seeing this young girl idea, he also, I guess, could play a dad. He plays dads quite often. So that's one angle. But the other thing that I'm concerned about is that apparently rumors are that the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne, will also be in this movie, and being considered for her is Rashida Jones from Parks and Recreation and other various Lorne Michaels television shows. Now, nothing against Rashida Jones. I actually think just on the surface, if you were to take away every other element, if you were just casting in a vacuum, Rashida Jones actually looks a little bit like Janet Van Dyne and could make a very appealing Janet Van Dyne. And you might recall they were considering Eva Longoria supposedly earlier, another TV actress. And I also, bringing diversity, this is the first time they would be really casting, Zoe Saldana will be in Guardians of the Galaxy, but she'll be painted green, so I don't really know if that counts. But you're bringing, first time, not a white female into the Marvel Universe. But Rashida Jones is very, very television. Very TV. I think that's where she's most well known. And so if I think you put Rashida Jones next to Paul Rudd with a kid, I mean, you just have like a really lame Judd Apatow film at this point. And I would be very concerned about that. So these casting announcements, they give me cause for concern, and I'd be curious to know what you guys think of them. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Let me close that window so it doesn't distract me, because I have another window for story number 3. All right, but let's go to story number 2, which has no window. It is a story that I feel pretty strongly about, so I don't need to refer to any notes, but it's the idea that Joe Wright, the director behind Pride and Prejudice, the Keira Knightley version, then perhaps more notably Atonement, and then recently Anna Karenina, has been signed to direct a new Peter Pan film. Now, of course, these big dark fairy tale movies are very big right now. Alice in Wonderland did fantastic. We have the Maleficent trailer that came out earlier today. And also, Snow White and the Huntsman did well. So even though we've had a few flops like Red Riding Hood, and of course Mirror Mirror, which was not a dark fairy tale, perhaps that was its mistake, but this market's still very popular. Oh, and yes, and the Oz the Great and Powerful, that film as well did very nicely. So I think it's smart to do a Peter Pan film, and I think that Joe Wright is actually a very interesting choice. Now, granted, Anna Karenina is one of the worst films I've ever seen, the one with Keira Knightley, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Jude Law. Good cast, but just really torturous to watch. Really, one of the worst movie-going experiences I've ever had. However, it was very beautiful, and I think that Joe Wright is talented. I think he was just misled creatively. I think he had an idea to create it as if this movie was taking place on a stage, and that was a horrible idea, which really stunted the film and made it impossible to be drawn into it. However, set design-wise, he had some really interesting ideas, and I think that would be vital to a really interesting Peter Pan. So I'm curious to see what he'll do. I think you can almost bet money that Keira Knightley will be Tinkerbell. We'll see, though, how Disney might feel about her since she bailed on their Pirates franchise and was kind of down on it, actually. I mean, you might think they just parted ways amicably, but she was like, I really don't like playing this character. I want out of here. Kind of like what Rachel Weisz did with The Mummy back in the day. She was that franchise catapulted her to stardom, and she was really disdainful of it and wanted to go make small little indie films, but that's how we all know how that worked out. I think that's fine. Listen, I know a lot of you are like, oh, maybe actors just want to be actors, and I think, you know what, more power to them, but I think it's really in poor form to diss what put you on the map and got you your first bit of attention. It's similar to the way Hilary Swank said horrible things about 90210 when she was winning her Oscars for all her awards for Boys Don't Cry. It's like, I don't think you ever would have been cast in Boys Don't Cry if you hadn't been on 90210, which made you somewhat of a recognizable name. So I think people should give credit where credit is due. All right, so I would definitely see a Peter Pan movie. I love Peter Pan films. They made a Peter Pan live-action film with Jason Isaacs as Captain Hook a few years ago, which was a fantastic movie, actually, and somewhat adult, actually, with some of the romantic undertones between Peter and Wendy for a film with preteens. But it was very good, actually, and I felt bad that it didn't do better at the box office. But Peter Pan is a well that never runs dry. I really like the subject matter, and I think it could make a very interesting, more adult Peter. I think you could have something really interesting there that people would multiple demographics would go to. So Joe Wright, I would roll the dice on him, but I would certainly be watching him like a hawk. So that's what I would say about this film. All right, so the third story of the day, let's go to this window that I have open. I'm going to put a picture up now. It's the first picture to come out of the new film Pele, which is about, of course, which many say is the greatest soccer player of all time from Brazil. Came to prominence in the 1970s, and I think that it's remarkable that a film has yet to be made about him. But I think this is actually somewhat American-backed. Even though they're shooting in Brazil, it has an international cast. But it is produced by Imagine Entertainment, which is Brian Grazer and Ron Howard's company. And I think that a film like this coming along is just fantastic. And it just shows how powerful the Latino and also African-American, I guess, for lack of a better word, black audience, because I'm talking about global, has become. This film would be made because Pele, I believe, has African origins or is black. I'm trying to be so PC here. Cut me some slack, everybody, I hope. But he grew up in Brazil. He is a fantastic soccer player. He won the first, let's see here, World Cup for Brazil. I just wanted to make sure I got that right. Oh, in 1958. So we're talking even earlier than the 70s. I'm sorry. As an American, I'm not a big soccer fan. But my dad did sit next to Pele once on the airplane, before I was born, I believe. And he said Pele was quite nice, a very nice gentleman. But Pele was a huge star, and I think that he quite the hero to the people of Brazil, and someone who's deserving of his own film. So I think it's very interesting that that's what we're going to be getting. So I'm very excited about this. I think it's very interesting. All right, so that is that's the third story of the day. Sorry, they're making a building announcement here, which is distracting me just a little bit. Sorry about that. I usually don't like to do cuts in these, but there was a building announcement over the intercom, just a drill, and I didn't want to detract from the viewer question and have to compete with that, because David Tucker Jr.'s question deserves our full attention. All right, so David Tucker Jr. asks, do you think that live-action adaptations of cartoons are bad? Yes, there are some good ones, but most are bad, and it seems like they make them for the wrong demographic, a way too young demographic. A good example is Underdog. It seems like it was made for the kids of the people who grew up on it, instead of, I think, as David is saying, the original audience. I think that, and David continues saying, I think that if they want to make a movie for a beloved cartoon, keep the movie as a cartoon. I can understand where Hollywood's coming from, but at the same time, I personally totally agree with you, David. And the example that I'm going to use, because I'm not familiar with Underdog, which I think was Underdog's problem, basically at the end of the day, that it had a very small audience, period. But I felt that Avatar: The Last Airbender, instead of making that a live-action movie and retelling a story that the fans had already seen, I strongly felt that they should have done the older version, that we keep seeing in the old friends that are referred to in The Legend of Korra. I would have liked to see adult characters, versions of our beloved cast of Aang and Zuko and company, but animated. I think that Japan has a wonderful adult anime industry that produces films that are really high quality. Akira, for instance, is an animated film that is very adult and sophisticated. And I think that Hollywood really needs to stop typecasting or categorizing animation as all ages or child fare. And because I think if a really wonderful film is done correctly, aimed at adults that's animated, it would be successful. Because just think of what you could accomplish. And I'm not talking these like creepy things that Robert Zemeckis made in the Final Fantasy movie where they're pseudo-realistic. I'm talking something that's unapologetically animated, but has a lot of great action sequences. And for instance, all the bending is much easier to do with animation than there was so little bending in the live action version. So I agree with you. I think that if people are fans of something in an animated form, of course they want to continue to see it animated. And I think just pour more money into it, into the animated, the film version of something animated, so that it's a higher caliber and you can achieve more and get movie quality animation, which is of course beautiful to look at, and even 2D. I'm excited that Disney, I've heard rumors, and I'm going to cover it next week, that they're not, or not, maybe the week after, that they're not totally doing away with this 2D, 3D hybrid that they did with Paper Man. It's just kind of on the back burner, but I think that's the sweet spot that I think Disney, I'm hoping they're not giving up on, because I think that's where they could really make their money and restore themselves to the top of the animation food chain. But back to your question, David, I totally agree. I think in general, Hollywood should stop talking down to their audiences. And as you might recall from yesterday's viewer question, younger viewers are saying, I don't like being talked down to as well. Hollywood thinks that they're doing something for me, but it's just basically for a toddler. And also, as we all see, toddlers can swipe now on iPods and stuff before they can speak, so they probably think they're being talked down to. So I think Hollywood should always err on the side of caution and try to just tell the best sophisticated, interesting story they can, with that works on multiple levels, like some of the best animated films from Disney and Pixar and DreamWorks, and so you can appreciate it at different ages. And you know, even like a James Bond film. James Bond films are great because they can be appreciated even when you're a small kid and you don't get all the innuendo, and then you can discover a whole different layer to them when you become an adult. So I think you can never go wrong with treating your audience with respect, no matter what their age. So great question, David. I would like to see an animated movie of Avatar, The Last Airbender, or Legend of Korra series, and I'd be curious to know, you guys out there, what would you like to see as an animated movie, be it a current cartoon or anime, or maybe just something else entirely, maybe a book that you feel would be better adapted, or a comic book as animation. We'll see how Big Hero 6 goes. That'll be interesting from Disney Marvel. That's their first Marvel animated film. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Again, sorry for the cut. Write down below your thoughts on today's stories, and also the viewer question, and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.